If you want to change your life, you have to start by changing your brain. The phrase rewire your mind isn't just motivational jargon, it's a biological reality. The human brain is built to change. This capacity is called neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reshape itself based on behavior, experience, and intention. But it doesn't happen by accident. You have to engage the system deliberately. The human brain doesn't change just because you want it to. It changes because it's forced to. At the core of that change is a principle called neuroplasticity, the ability of your nervous system to rewire itself in response to experience. But neuroplasticity doesn't happen passively. It's not enough to read about it or to hear someone say the brain can change. You need to engage the biological conditions that actually signal to the brain this moment matters. One of the most critical conditions is focus, and the other is friction. Focus is not just mental engagement, it's a neurological state. When you're truly focused, your brain shifts into a different mode. Your acetylcholine levels rise, sharpening your attention, and norepinephrine kicks in, increasing alertness. These chemicals act like spotlight signals, telling the brain, pay attention to this. This is important. Focus is the gateway to plasticity. Without it, your brain doesn't know what to change because it doesn't know what matters. But focus alone isn't enough. You also need friction, a sense of challenge, struggle, or difficulty. It's this very struggle, this friction at the edge of your ability that triggers the neural machinery required for rewiring. If you're doing something easy, automatic, or familiar, you're not pushing the system hard enough to cause it to adapt. Think of it like physical training. You don't build muscle by lifting a pencil. You build it by straining under controlled resistance. The brain is the same. It adapts when it's challenged. This is why deliberate practice, purposeful, uncomfortable, focused effort is so powerful. When you repeatedly direct your attention towards something difficult, especially when you're trying to improve or learn, you're laying down new circuits. And here's the catch. Those moments of frustration, when you feel like giving up, are often the most valuable from a plasticity standpoint. That's when the brain is right at the edge of its current wiring and therefore the most open to change. Let's be clear, this process doesn't feel good in the moment. It feels like work. It is work. Your brain actually burns more glucose and oxygen during high effort focus than at rest. You may even feel mentally fatigued. That's the cost of change. But if you can stay in that effort zone for just a little longer, maybe 5, 10, 15 more minutes, you massively increase the likelihood that the session will result in actual neural change. The reward doesn't have to come immediately. In fact, it's better if it doesn't. When you start to associate the process of effort, the friction itself, with a sense of progress, you begin to tap into a much more sustainable motivation loop. This is mediated by dopamine, which reinforces the behaviors that lead to reward. If you can start to enjoy the challenge itself, not just the outcome, you'll train your brain to crave the process of growth. There's also something very practical about all of this. You don't need to completely overhaul your life to rewire your brain. You need repeated sessions of focused effort, ideally 45, 90 minutes a day, directed towards something specific. Whether it's learning a language, building emotional resilience, writing, or training your body, the principle is the same. Enter a focused state, embrace the friction, and stay with it long enough to drive adaptation. Discomfort is not a sign you're failing, it's a sign you're learning. The goal is not to eliminate friction, but to use it as fuel. Because friction, when paired with focus, is the neurological trigger that tells the brain, pay attention, encode this, build something new. You can't rewire your brain without struggle. But when you understand the biology behind that struggle, you can lean into it, not as a punishment, but as proof that you're doing the real work of transformation. That's where growth begins. Effort is essential for change, but it's not enough on its own. If you want to rewire your brain, if you want to actually install the changes you're working so hard to create, you have to understand this. Neuroplasticity doesn't occur during the effort itself. It occurs afterward, during periods of rest and recovery. This is one of the most misunderstood principles in personal development and peak performance. Most people push harder. thinking that more effort equals more progress. And while effort is absolutely necessary to trigger the neuroplastic process, to get your brain to pay attention and mark a particular experience as important, it's only the first step. The brain doesn't finalize those changes during the strain of the activity. It does so during rest. That's when your nervous system starts laying down the actual changes you've earned. During effort, you're in what's called a sympathetic dominant state. Your brain is flooded with norepinephrine and acetylcholine. These neuromodulators increase alertness and focus, and they create the neurochemical conditions that say this matters. But the changes in the neural wiring, the synaptic growth, the pruning, the strengthening of circuits, that doesn't happen until you switch into a more parasympathetic dominant state. That's your recovery mode. That's when the nervous system shifts from go to grow. One of the most powerful tools here is sleep. During deep sleep, particularly slow wave sleep and REM sleep, your brain replays certain patterns of activity, especially those related to learning or intense emotional experience. This replay mechanism is critical. It's how the brain consolidates memory, refines motor skills, and stabilizes the new neural connections that were formed during the day. If you're skipping sleep or not prioritizing sleep quality, you are literally wasting the effort you put in while awake. But recovery doesn't have to wait until bedtime. There are ways to deliberately downshift your nervous system during the day to support plasticity and accelerate progress. One of the most well-studied and effective methods is non-sleep deep rest, NSDR. Protocols like yoga nidra, certain types of guided meditation, or even a 10 to 30 minute period of silent, eyes closed rest without sleep. These protocols calm the nervous system, lower cortisol, and open the door for neuroplasticity to take hold. A short NSDR session after a bout of intense mental or physical work can dramatically increase the value of that effort. This also ties into ultradian rhythms, natural cycles of alertness and fatigue that occur every 90 to 120 minutes throughout the day. The brain simply isn't built for endless, uninterrupted concentration. You might be able to force it for a short time, but eventually your focus, motivation, and learning capacity all begin to decline. The better approach is to work in focused blocks, followed by recovery blocks. Sprint, then recover. That's how the nervous system is designed to operate. There's also an emotional aspect here. When you begin to view rest as part of the work, not a break from the work, you start to create a healthier and more sustainable performance cycle. You stop feeling guilty for stepping away. You stop chasing productivity at the cost of your biology. And, ironically, you start producing better results with less burnout. You must learn to respect the recovery process, not as a luxury, not as a reward, but as a requirement for long-term growth and transformation. Effort opens the plasticity window, rest is what closes it and locks in the gains. So, if you're training, learning, creating, or healing, go hard with intention, but then just as deliberately back off. Let the nervous system breathe, let the brain do its behind-the-scenes work. That's where the real wiring happens. And that's how you become someone new, by knowing when to go all in and when to let go. The brain is a learning machine, and like any machine, it gets better through repetition. But it's not just repetition that creates strong, lasting change. It's repetition with variation that builds flexible, resilient neural circuits. If you want to rewire your mind effectively, whether you're learning a skill, changing a habit, or developing emotional control, you have to understand how the nervous system responds to both consistency and novelty. Let's start with the role of repetition. Every time you repeat a behavior, thought, or pattern of focus, your brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with that activity. Think of it like carving a path through a forest. The first few times you walk it, the trail is barely visible. But with consistent use, it becomes clearer, easier, and more automatic. This is how myelination works in the nervous system. Myelin is a fatty sheath that insulates neural circuits and makes signals travel faster and more efficiently. The more a circuit is used, the more myelin wraps around it, making that behavior or thought pattern easier to access next time. But there's a catch. If you repeat the exact same thing in the exact same way every time, your brain can get too efficient. It shifts into autopilot. The process becomes automatic and plasticity shuts down. The brain thinks, I've got this handled, and stops updating or refining the skill. That's great if you're brushing your teeth, but if your goal is to actually grow, to expand capacity, to become better, it's not enough. That's where variation comes in. By introducing slight changes to the way you practice or engage with a skill, you keep your brain alert. You create a state of controlled novelty, just different enough to stimulate learning, but not so different that the task becomes unrecognizable. This activates attention, forces re-engagement, and keeps the neuroplasticity window open. It's a delicate balance, but it's powerful. For example, if you're trying to improve your public speaking, don't give the same talk in the same room every time, change the setting. Try standing instead of sitting, use different slides, speak to a mirror, then a camera, then a live person. Each variation creates new wiring opportunities while reinforcing the core skill. You're not just getting better at one version of the task, you're building a robust, transferable skill set that can adapt to new challenges. This also applies to emotional regulation, cognitive training, or even physical fitness. If you're training your focus through meditation, don't just sit the same way at the same time, listening to the same guidance. Change the posture, change the duration, try it in a noisy environment or with different internal emotional states. Your nervous system will adapt and become more capable under a broader range of conditions. There's also evidence that varying feedback and difficulty levels strengthens learning. If a task is always too easy, your brain checks out. But if it's too hard, frustration can block progress. The sweet spot is just outside your comfort zone, with enough variation to keep the nervous system engaged but not overwhelmed. This is where real neuroplastic growth occurs. Repetition builds fluency. Variation builds resilience. The combination of both builds a brain that's not only efficient, but also flexible, able to handle complexity, uncertainty, and change. That's the kind of wiring you want if you're trying to grow as a person, perform at a higher level, or break through old patterns. So don't just repeat, refine. Don't just show up, adapt. That's how you take a basic skill and turn it into something transformative. That's how you build not just stronger circuits, but better ones. When it comes to changing your brain and behavior, effort and repetition matter. But there's another critical player in the neuroplasticity equation, dopamine. This powerful neuromodulator isn't just about feeling good. It plays a central role in what you remember, what you're motivated to pursue, and ultimately what gets hardwired into your nervous system. Dopamine is often misunderstood. People associate it with pleasure, but that's not quite right. Dopamine is about anticipation, about the pursuit of reward, not the reward itself. It's the signal that tells the brain, this is important, pay attention, reinforce this behavior. And because of that, dopamine is a key mechanism through which the brain decides what to remember and what to forget. When you're in a learning state, whether practicing a skill, engaging in focused work, or trying to change a behavior, dopamine release tells your nervous system this matters. And when dopamine is present during or shortly after a behavior, it increases the likelihood that your brain will encode that behavior, experience, or pattern of thought into long-term memory. This is neuroplasticity in action. Your brain selectively strengthens connections based on what you care about. So how do you leverage this mechanism? One powerful approach is to learn to associate effort with internal reward. If you only feel good when you succeed or get validation, your dopamine system becomes fragile. It's reliant on outcomes and external circumstances. But if you can start to feel good simply because you're engaging in the process, because you're pushing yourself, showing up, and getting 1% better, then you begin to rewire your system from the inside out. This is called dopamine self-regulation, and it's a trainable skill. When you learn to release dopamine from the process itself, not just the result, you activate a far more sustainable motivation loop. You teach your brain to love the challenge. You start to get dopamine not from being done, but from doing. And that's incredibly powerful because it keeps you moving forward even when progress is slow or outcomes are uncertain. Another key idea is timing. Dopamine doesn't need to be released during the task itself for it to have an effect on memory. It can be released right after what scientists call a neuromodulatory window. So let's say you push through a difficult study session, a tough workout, or a focused creative sprint. If Afterward, you take a moment to acknowledge your effort and let yourself feel a sense of satisfaction or pride, even just for a minute. That dopamine release can retroactively tag the experience as important. The nervous system will then work behind the scenes to consolidate what you learned. Also, don't overlook the importance of novelty and surprise. Dopamine spikes are strongest when something good happens unexpectedly. If you always do the same routine the same way at the same time, your brain habituates and stops caring. But if you change the environment, add a new challenge, or achieve a small breakthrough, that sense of surprise gives your brain a powerful dopamine signal and a much greater likelihood of wiring in the lesson. Finally, understand that dopamine can be depleted. Overuse of stimulation, especially artificial sources like social media, junk food, or constant entertainment, can reduce your brain's sensitivity to dopamine. That means it becomes harder to feel motivated or focused on the things that actually matter. So protect your dopamine system. Use it wisely. Don't spike it constantly. Learn to space out rewards and connect dopamine to effort, not ease. In the end, what gets remembered is what gets rewarded. The brain is always listening to your chemistry. If you want to rewire yourself, learn to reward the work, not just the win. That's how you shape your memory, your behavior, and your identity. Your brain is constantly listening to what you say, especially what you say to yourself. And it's not just listening in the metaphorical sense. Your internal dialogue, your self-talk, your use of language, these aren't just background noise. They are biological commands to your nervous system. They shape perception, influence behavior, and over time, they construct identity. This happens through a process called top-down processing, where higher-order brain regions, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, influence how other parts of the brain interpret the world and act in it. The language you use forms the framework through which your brain understands reality. That includes how you see yourself, what you believe you're capable of, and how you respond to challenges. Here's the key. The circuits in your brain that represent identity, that is the narrative of who you think you are heavily influenced by repeated patterns of internal dialogue. If you continually say things like, "I'm terrible at this," or "I always mess things up," you're not just expressing frustration. You're literally reinforcing the neural circuits that encode that version of yourself. And your nervous system will adjust behavior to match that narrative. This isn't about positive affirmations or wishful thinking. It's about being precise, intentional, and honest with your language. Your self-talk needs to align with your goals and your biology. That might mean shifting from "I can't do this" to "I'm not good at this yet." One word, yet, can change the entire neurological outcome of a learning experience. It signals to the brain that the process is ongoing, that adaptation is still possible, and with repetition, this rewires the identity circuit toward growth. Another way language shapes identity is through what psychologists call self-attribution. When you say, "I am disciplined," even before you fully believe it, you activate and strengthen the circuits associated with that identity. When you act in ways that confirm that statement, even in small, micro-level decisions, your brain links behavior to belief, and the wiring gets stronger. Over time, this is how identity becomes not just a story you tell yourself, but a pattern you live out. It's also worth noting that spoken language, even when you're the only one listening, has a stronger neurological effect than silent thought. When you say something out loud, your auditory system processes it, your motor system engages to produce it, and your prefrontal cortex codes it into meaning. That's three major brain systems working together. So if you want to reinforce a new identity or belief, try saying it deliberately, repeatedly, and with presence. Let's talk physiology for a moment. Negative self-talk increases activity in the default mode network, a brain system associated with rumination, self-doubt, and mental chatter. In contrast, positive, structured, and purposeful self-talk engages the task positive network, the part of your brain that's focused, action-oriented, and aligned with goals. So when you clean up your language, you're not just changing thoughts, you're changing brain states. This isn't about pretending, it's about precision. Self-talk should be grounded in truth, but aimed at growth. "This is hard" can coexist with "I can do hard things." "I failed" can exist alongside "I'm learning." The language you use doesn't have to ignore reality. It just needs to frame it in a way that supports adaptation. In the end, the story you tell yourself is the blueprint your brain uses to construct your identity. And like any blueprint, it can be updated. With conscious effort, repeated language, and aligned behavior, you can literally rewire who you believe yourself to be. And when that happens, the brain doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you are. The nervous system is not built in isolation. It responds to and is shaped by what surrounds it. If you're serious about changing your behavior, improving performance, or rewiring your identity, then your environment cannot be treated as neutral. It's not just a backdrop, it's a biological input. And if your environment is in conflict with your goals, your brain is constantly receiving mixed signals, signals that sabotage effort and slow or even block change. The human brain is exquisitely sensitive to context. From an evolutionary perspective, this made sense. Our ancestors needed to rapidly assess environments for cues of safety, danger, opportunity, or threat. That same system operates in us now. Whether it's a cluttered desk, toxic social group, poor lighting, or chaotic routine, your nervous system absorbs these inputs and adjusts behavior accordingly. It's automatic, it's fast, and it's often unconscious. This is why you can have all the motivation, discipline, and vision in the world, but if your surroundings are not aligned, your biology will work against you. Let's break this down. If your goal is focus, but your space is full of distractions, phones, notifications, noise, you're asking your prefrontal cortex to override dozens of microstimuli every minute. That costs energy, and eventually attention breaks down. But if you clean up that space, create a designated area for deep work, and minimize unnecessary input, you're not just removing distractions, you're priming your nervous system to enter the correct cognitive state. If your goal is physical health, but your kitchen is stocked with ultra-processed foods, or your schedule is built around sitting for hours without movement, you're relying on willpower to override what your environment is nudging you to do. That works for a while, but eventually environment wins. So instead, engineer your space. Place the water bottle where you see it. Lay out your running shoes the night before. Pre-chop vegetables. Make the healthy choice the easy default. From a neuroscience standpoint, this is about cueing behavior. The brain operates on loops: stimulus, response, reward. When you design an environment that presents the right stimuli, you make it easier for your nervous system to initiate the behaviors you want, and every time you complete those behaviors, you reinforce the identity circuits associated with your goals. This also applies to the people in your environment. Your social circle is one of the most powerful environmental factors. Human brains co-regulate. When you're around people who are negative, cynical, or stagnant, your brain mirrors those states, even if you consciously disagree. Conversely, being around driven, focused, supportive people creates a neurochemical and emotional atmosphere that makes growth easier. That's not philosophy, that's social neuroscience. Even something as simple as light affects your biology. If you want to be alert and focused, exposure to natural sunlight in the morning triggers cortisol release in the right circadian rhythm. If your workspace is dim, your brain gets the wrong time of day signals and your energy and focus decline. These are environmental tweaks that have neurological consequences. Here's the bottom line. Don't rely solely on internal force. Design external alignment. Every behavior you want to build should be supported by